Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to be getting started just in a couple of minutes. We're glad to have you here. It's going to be a good, strong little group that we have going. Really excited about having you all here as we're focusing on something that I think is ultimately really about as important of a topic as we possibly can have right now. So really excited to have you all here. If you want to say hello, I see some familiar faces. So glad that you can join us. We are really excited to have you all here today, focused on, I called this presentation Democracy and AI. I am, as you all know, if you've been with our webinars before, we're really focused on the impact of AI on education, but also on responsible AI. And when I met Ace, who's going to be featured in just a minute, I guess about a month ago, I was really just so pleased to see that Civic Now and a large organization of organizations focused on building students' civic awareness, their skill sets, and their connection to our democracy was just really pretty amazing. And so there's a new report that's been released just 2 weeks ago. And so we're going to have a bit of an overview of what that report is. And then we're going to have some time with some special guests who are not in the scene, including a student. We love our student voice here. So Sanvi is going to be sharing her perspective of why this is so important from a student perspective. As always, say hello, get involved. I mean, we're going to be a little tight group, so like say hello. I know some familiar faces in our wonderful group. So where you are, where you're coming from, and also if you have resources to share. What's really cool about today's webinar is it's focused on a key piece of content you can take back to your context. And so not only do we have this report, but we also have all of these amazing resources that are really practical around what this moment in time means for our students in our schools. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing now. Really excited to have you all here. And I'm going to ask Ace to come to there we go. Oh, and I think maybe, I'm going to figure out how to make sure that the chat is going to work because I think that's probably an issue. But I want to introduce Ace. The first, Ace, I always ask the question, love you to introduce yourself, but also what was your first experience with generative AI?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Amanda, for the time. My name's Ace Parsi. I'm the Director of Coalition Engagement here at iCivics, which is the organization founded by the recently late Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who deeply believed that schools had a core mission to our constitutional democracy. And I share that belief. I'm a first generation immigrant. I've immigrated from a country who is people are fighting for democracy every day. And so, as the song goes, you don't know what you got until it's gone. And this is part of what we're talking, what we're here for is that there's this like inflection point for our society here. My first experience with generative AI was I was listening to an interview with Sam Altman, who was talking about this being that people not understanding the concept of exponential growth, that this is all raising up as in an exponential way. And I had thought about that because we were just coming out of COVID and he was comparing it to COVID as another example. And so I got on this site and I started looking at ChatGPT and I started looking at the comments. And, it was people were saying that this is the most important invention since fire. And I thought to myself, like, oh, we're talking about this in a very playful way. And we should, there's some things that are just really fun about it. But there's also really important implications for our democracy. And so if we made the mistake 12, 13 years ago when we put the most powerful tool humanity had then created into middle schoolers' back pockets without any sort of training, we couldn't do that in this case with AI, that this has incredibly important implications for how we come together as communities, our democracy as a whole, its long-term health and fate. And so that's, I think, the level of importance of this particular conversation. So that was my first experience with it.
Did you have a first prompt? Did you try it out? What was your first go?
It was, I think there was something about writing a Valentine to my wife as a country music song, including some other, and I think my daughter had put something in there about a rabbit librarian in the in the image prompt there. So I think that those were the things that I'm like, oh, this is playful, But I'm
Yeah.
I'm glad I get to go back into my professional thing and think about like with others who really care about this issue and that connection to say like, well, what do we do with this to make sure that we take advantage of the positive without the challenge? But
Yeah.
librarian rabbit, I think, was the probably the first thing that I saw.
I love it. I always love everyone's first prompt. And so, as we're going to get started, the way that this is going to run is that we're going to have Ace actually run through this report and also focus on some key resources you can bring back to your contacts. I know we have people from all across the spectrum here and those that will be watching later. And so I put the link in the chat so you can follow along. And Ace, it's over to you now.
Thanks so much, Amanda. So I wanted to note that our coalition, the Civics Now Coalition, which some of you will be familiar with, includes now over 330 organizations, and it includes a pretty diverse set. So we have the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and the JFK Library, the Urban League, and the Cato Institute. We have pro-CRT, anti-CRT type organizations, and they just all believe that schools have this mission. And we were partnering with our who I call our sister coalition, which is the Listen First Coalition. They're having an event, the National Week of Conversation, actually right around that AI Literacy Day. So hopefully that could be a part of that work as well. And there are over 400 organizations that focus on social cohesion. So our imperative was around that sort of intersection. Education, K-12 education, that civic mission of education and how it plays into our democracy and overall social cohesion. I want to highlight, so Mark was part of this group, but we had some really interesting, diverse thinkers on this topic. Um, and I'll go over. I will urge you. I mentioned this in our webinar that we did during Civic Learning Week. The report itself is, I think, 10 pages. There's some collateral products and things that are 2 pages. I encourage you not to put it through AI, to actually read it and think about and be part of this conversation, because this is where these sorts of conversations begin. Um, our beginning imperative was, I think that there's some people out in the field that will speak about AI in apocalyptic terms, and there are some people that will say this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. We think that it could be both, and the reality will which one will win out is not going to be accidental. It'll be intentional. It'll be based on our intention and our proactive actions and conversations that we have, we the field, we the AI for education field, we the Civics Now field, we the Listen First field, around how this plays out. So we wanted to embrace that there's both really positive realities for our democracy and also challenges that we have to address. And then in our conversation, it was interesting. And Mark, I'm taking us back to the memory lane right now, because at one of the first conversations, it came out that really like everything is civic, right? Like people having jobs is civic. Uh, that everything in some context is the arts are civics in some way. So we have to kind of draw some boundaries around that. So what we said that this group and this work is going to focus on is that K-12 civic learning. So not higher ed, not workforce and AI. And then there are a lot of issue specific. So like LGBTQ rights, the districts, free speech, what does it mean? All that kind of stuff. And what we wanted to really focus on was not the issue specific, but the transferable application. And we know noticed that we didn't want to go beyond we want to play with these ideas and that we have. So we really focused on the humanities. We had the National Council for Teachers of English and a lot of people in the civic space and others. So those were that's where the area is coming from. And our questions really related to those areas. One is how can it both the civic learning field embrace the power of this for good in very Spider-Man like terms? And how do we make sure that young people are really prepared to use this tool for the betterment of social cohesion and democracy? And then what are the applications? Like we are thinking about this for schools, but the Listen First Coalition is a 400 plus coalition of organizations that don't just care about schools. They care about broader social harmony, cohesion, bridging divides. And so we wanted to see the applications. And getting back to that point that this can have both negative and positive implications, and what are the actions and what are the realities that we can look to. And so there's a two-pager that Amanda will share into the chat as well that kind of like draws this out in more text. But basically, for us to be successful, and as this technology changes, there were some specific lenses that we wanted to focus in on our actions, whether those actions are practice, policy, research, or otherwise. That one, that the negative challenges will come if we're ethically vague about what the technology is going to do, and we just kind of have a wait and see. But if we can incorporate young people into the ethical conversation at the very outset, that we can possibly have them be part of that conversation and really impact something that will have just massive implications for their lives for years to come, so that they need to be part of that conversation. We noted that there's uses of AI that can be very individualistic and that can actually reduce the size of our communities. And so in the instruction in our how we practice that sort of civic learning, we want to make sure that that AI use, there's social cohesion and civic benefits when it's collaborative, so that we engage students together in this work. We know that this is changing every single day. Like, I think that there was one meeting where we started the meeting, and then while the meeting was happening, OpenAI announced that ChatGPT could look at images. So this is a lot of it is changing, and our school systems are not really good with change. And so we need to set up processes that our reactions can be more dynamic. We One of the things that's a big challenge is that the AI gives answers in very authoritative terms. So students can passively accept that input, and we know that that can be a huge challenge for misinformation and disinformation. We want to make sure that students are interrogating the AI content. It's really important for information literacy, and that students aren't just consumers of this AI input, they're also producers of it. In the same way that social media, students just don't consume information, they also produce it. And that has both positive and negative implications for our society. Um, we know that there are students that can use AI functions to cheat or produce their work. So what does that mean for our assessments? So we need to make sure that our assessments are used in a way that drive out original insights from students and perspectives. And that this isn't something, because it gives sort of that disciplinary knowledge, that we're going to have to, and this is really important, we're going to have to think about across disciplines. You are not just a civics teacher if you teach in the social studies, you are also a civic teacher if you teach in the English language arts, the math, the sciences. All these imperatives that I'm highlighting here have implications across our different disciplines. Um, and so then we talked about, all right, well, being civic ready isn't just about knowing something. It's about the combination of knowledge, skills, dispositions, and behaviors. So our history, our heritage, skills like information literacy, assessing reliability, critical thinking, and collaboration. Dispositions like just appreciation of free speech and differences, civility, curiosity, behaviors like being an informed voter, and we're in an election season, serving on juries, volunteering. And in the same way that I highlighted earlier, that this could have both positive and challenging implications, we tried to dig deep and say, like, well, what are some of those positive and challenging implications? And Amanda can share the two-pager that has this broken out more, but just to give the executive summary of it, that this is something that students can engage in a more deep way with knowledge and content, can have more ready access to it. Like, uh, an example, my daughter reads this book, Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales, or maybe, yeah, I think it's Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. And there was a historical figure in Oregon, and she debated him. We using it, gave the AI an opportunity to play that role. So that was like, I mean, it's a positive thing to be able to access knowledge, but it can also be a tool for disinformation and misinformation. Um, it can help prioritize the skills of these sort of civic outcomes, but then without algorithmic or digital literacy, these critical skills may not be developed, and students can be just passively soaking this information in. Um, it can, for a social cohesion purpose, I know some of the things that become really particularly challenging in this time is that we don't talk with people that have any sort of differing views than we do. And you can use the AI for that purpose, and that can be really good. But it can also read, depending on how that deep fakes and other things that go along with it, it can breed greater distrust and division. Amanda and I will email back a bunch of times during this setting up this presentation. And if it was just Amanda using her AI to email me and I was using my AI to email her, that would have an implication for our relationship together. And then the behaviors, it has an opportunity to give that sort of like opportunities for young people to engage in more types of things, but it can also undermine that trust in each other in that same sort of way. Um, so what do we do with that? Um, we believe one of the things that we felt heartened by was that some of the best practices in civic learning that we know, youth voice, inquiry, based learning, those opportunities that we don't sacrifice knowledge, that historical knowledge is really important. The opportunities like service learning and experiences in extracurricular activities, all those things are still relevant. They are still the same sort of things, but now we have to think about them and ground them into how AI can affect those sorts of experiences. And to the extent that our North Star is those relationships and being able to ground our work in that, that can be the guide for us to move forward. Um, I'll talk a little bit about this is we can't, I think, I am not one of those people that thinks that we can just leave it to the technology companies and everything will be okay. I don't think they are. I mean, one of our great partners in this whole work has been SIIA, the software industry, and they don't think that. I think that we need an investment. So we need an investment in technical assistance and professional development. We need guidance on how the challenges, not only in what schools can do in terms of cheating on an assignment, but what does that mean for our social cohesion? So we need that guidance. We need a major investment. So currently, for every $50 we invest as a country in STEM learning, and I do not want to be one of those people that poo-poo STEM. We invest an equivalent 50 cents right now in civic and history learning. That is not proportionate to the challenges that we're going to face in this particular area. So we need an investment. We need to be able to advocate for that. We need support because a lot of our educators don't have the grasp of some of you all on this call. And we need to use our net levers not just as funding, but also to recognize teachers, students, schools, that are doing, and technology companies, frankly, that are doing this work really effectively. We ended with here, and there was a little bit of a debate internally about whether we should even have this section because things are changing so fast that some of these questions may be answered, and we wanted this to be timeless. But I think actually a lot of these questions are still relevant. How are the statewide standards around AI and information literacy affecting behavior? So the standards a good lever, and what do those high quality standards look like? How do we prepare our educators? What are the qualities of preparing educators? And I don't mean that just generally AI. I really mean that in the intersection around social cohesion and democracy. Like there's specific practices, and we need training around those practices. Uh, has that ubiquity changed how teachers interact with their students and what they think that students need to be? Because it's not just about resources, it's about how teachers conceptualize their role more broadly. What are the practices that can be implemented? And then just broadly speaking, for safety purposes for students, what's that look like in the future? So thank you for this time. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
That's
I'll stop
amazing. So
sharing my screen.
I just want to, first of all, for those of you that are doing this work already, I think there are a couple of things that really stuck out to me, and I know I saw that in the chat too. I think one is this idea that we are on a spectrum. I think that the idea that this is we tend to talk about technology as like the two parts. Like we're either a doomer or an optimist, right? Or like, but what we don't usually have is the right level of conversation to identify that there are good and bad in all things, right? And that
Hmm.
it's an intentionality that has to happen with us, right? We have to be intentional to ensure that the good things outweigh the bad things. And as you have said, social media devices were a moment where we missed. I think we can all agree that we really missed that moment for our kids specifically. I think it's impacted us all in really interesting ways, and sometimes good again and sometimes bad. But I know that we've seen now that there have been significant and deep and existential impacts of giving students and young people devices and social media. And I think that this is that moment that we don't want to miss. And so I'm
Absolutely.
so grateful for the work of Civic Now and everything that was done, because what we're doing is we're not waiting for 5 years or 10 years, and we're saying, no, no. In the first, year and change of this being a technology that is in our collective consciousness, we're going to go right at it. And so that's why I was so excited to have Ace join. And I'm actually going to call up the rest of our special guests. So they're going to be so great. So we have two special guests with us today. We have Mark Stolen and we have Samvi. And so as you can see, a diverse group here. And we're going to actually do a bit of a little bit of our more traditional panel. Now that we've had that amazing foundation that was given by Ace, and with the fact that we have your 10-page paper, you have the couple of one-pagers around application, which I think is really great. But now we're going to talk about what this really means, because I always love that, like, we have these supporting documents, but I think we have to have the stories too, right? We need to talk to people and get those stories. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask a couple questions to everybody. We're actually going to start with Samvi. So you get the same question that I ask everyone, which is, can you introduce yourself and then also talk about the first time you used generative AI?
Definitely. Hi, I'm Sanvi. I'm 19 years old. I'm currently a sophomore at UC Berkeley, and I'm really excited to take part in this panel and hear about the amazing work that Ace and everyone has been doing with regards to putting this report together. So congratulations. And yeah, I guess my first time using generative AI was probably like, I probably didn't even realize that it was this, and I just had to do some research really quickly to double check if it what counted as AI. But like the autofill on Google, like the email autofill, I think definitely probably the first time, and I didn't even realize that was like AI, but yeah, the first time I ever used that, or even Apple autofill. Yeah, I think that's probably the first time I did.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a wonderful first place to start, because AI has been part of our lives for a long time, and it doesn't mean ChatGPT. And so when we think about this, to Ace's point, if you're suddenly not writing your emails anymore because you're just using the hit button, has that changed the way that you're interacting with people? Has it made you more responsive, or has it made you less engaged, or a little bit of both? And so I think that's a really interesting place to go, especially since it's not just students that don't know that these tools are artificial intelligence, but I can tell you, as doing this work with teachers and leaders across the country, it's them too. Okay, Mark, next, will you introduce yourself and talk about your first time with generative AI?
Hi, thanks for joining. Thanks for having me join everyone. My name is Mark Stolen. I am currently the platform coach for New Tech Network. We bring project-based learning to schools all across the country. Um, I actually was one of the skeptics of AI, and I actually, right around the time that I was asked to join ACE's Civics Now group, my daughter had come home from school and said, "Daddy, have you heard of this thing called AI? My teacher said we could use it to make stories." And I'm like, all right, if my first grader is telling me it's time to use AI, it's time to go use AI. So I actually was working on another project for my work, and I needed to write an empathy interview, and the questions are always hard to write. So I told it, hey, ChatGPT, I need to make this empathy interview. Ask me any questions, and I was able to produce an empathy interview that I was able to use the following day. So pretty cool stuff.
Very interesting, but also, man, first graders, like, I think there is, we advocate at AI for Education for modeling, like best practice with even younger students, because they might be interacting with generative AI in Snapchat. If they have access to these tools, they are AI tools. So hopefully it was a modeling exercise, not just letting kids loose with ChatGPT 3.5 or 4. Although I know that there can be some fun that can be had with some image generation with our younger people. So we're going to start our panel, which is really great. And the first question is to everybody. And I think we've seen this work that's been done by Civics Now in this larger group. Why do you think it's so important for us to have taken this time that we have collectively to talk about the relationship between, AI and civics education, but really just AI and the way that we teach our kids right now? So what do you think, Samvi?
Definitely. I think that first, like definitely acknowledging that technology has been transformational for students. It's made education way more accessible. It's made extracurricular activities way more accessible. And I think especially in the context of this report, as we're talking about civic readiness, it's allowed us to share information at an unprecedented magnitude. It's been transformational for educating the broader population, not just students and young people. And I think even particularly with young people and students, they are highly informed on issues that are very far away from them now. And it's improved like generally their ability to connect with diverse viewpoints. And it's also been great for education in the sense that students can learn from AI. I know a lot of my peers, we oftentimes turn to like ChatGPT now if we want a quick answer to a question, and don't want to like bother our teacher or something. It can also support teachers in providing extra, lending hand for in cases where they might not be able to support every student individually, but at least AI can provide clarifying information or additional resources that students can use in the classroom. So overall, AI and technology I think, has been great for education, but I also think that it's a double-edged sword. When unchecked, we aren't even really sure the extent to which AI has been harmful. And we have like a few use cases that we can point to for where it definitely has been harmful. For example, like in the context of misinformation, like AI generated misinformation exacerbates like digital echo chambers and that phenomenon where like, in young people specifically, but also individuals, they can become entrenched in their own viewpoints without critically evaluating information or engaging in meaningful offline action. So that in terms of like critically thinking about civic topics, like that might not happen as much as a result of AI's contributions to certain misinformation spirals. Also like the correlation between like generally growing online consumption and exacerbated polarization, I think has definitely contributed to a lot of, especially when young people are engaging with these polarizing conversations online, a lot of limited trust in our institutions amongst young people specifically. So there's growing like youth civic apathy. We can even see this in the context of this year's election, where a lot of young people just don't align like with like the idea or understand the purpose of this election. They don't align with any ideology. So I think that what we're talking about today is like really important, not just in like understanding the harms associated with AI, but also focusing on the positives of AI and technology and how they can be better realized by understanding this, the potential for AI to be harmful. So yeah, I think that's why this is super important. I'm really excited to chat about it.
Well, first of all, how articulate are you? Amazing. So this is why I want to just say I'm going to take any time I have to like always say if you're not talking to students, then you're missing. And there are people that are going to be watching this that does not talk to students about this moment in time. This is why you have to do it, because that is not only a well articulated, like thoughtful answer, but also something that you deeply experience as well. And so I just think that this is why I'm so glad that you're here with us today. And I also just want to point out that, when ChatGPT for vision was put into the world, they had a model card. And the model card is where these tools, like this is like kind of the way they get around talking about risk associated with these models. And in the model card, it talked about the potential impact of significantly more disinformation because of the ability to not only create an image that's never been created, but create text that can now connect to that image that is also false. And that they had no solve for it. There was no red teaming. There was no fix for it. There's no way to fix it from what they did. They still released GPT-4 Vision into the market. And so I think that there is something to be said about where we're talking about that these are not just things that we're talking about from the perspective of students and teachers and leaders in the space, but also that this is a known issue from those that have the power to create these tools. So now to Mark, that is a hard, like, I don't know.
About to
Can you
say,
follow
Amanda has set me up for failure with following both of those.
I mean, after this is gonna be actually you guys can leave. It's gonna be zombie. I'm gonna go off
Gonna be
too.
fun. That was the plan, right? That was the plan the whole time. I think the reason this conversation is so important is because of the fact that our world is changing and our educators need to be prepared to teach in that world. How many people still own the such and such for dummies book or owns an encyclopedia, right? Those are long gone the way of the dinosaur because of the way the internet has changed it. If we are not aware of what AI can do and what AI can provide our learners and ourselves, it's going to pass us in the fast lane, and we're going to be the ones stuck with that encyclopedia set that we were sold for $1,500 and just collects dust in the corner. I really think that teachers oftentimes are, as Ace mentioned in his presentation, they're the slowest to adapt to change, right? The COVID was the first time that everyone had to suddenly use a learning management system, because now you can't just put it on the whiteboard. Nobody's in front of you for the whiteboard. So sometimes these big shifts caused by major changes, such as the AI becoming much more prevalent in the world, forces teachers to adapt and forces educators to figure out, what is it that AI can do? What is it that AI can provide? And how do I make sure that my students are prepared to use it in the future? I think there's an opportunity, but there's also a chance to do some real harm. There's a lot of schools that are banning AI because it's easier than trying to understand it. And if that's going to happen, that's going to do those students a disservice, because they're going to have less access and less opportunity and less practice, and ultimately they probably will find a way to use it outside of school anyway. So what good is it to ban it and not allow them the opportunity to learn in a controlled environment?
Yeah. And so, Mark, I mean, it's such a fascinating moment, right? Because coming, so we have like this AI kind of revolution coming right off the back of our COVID impact, right? And I think what we saw is that there were a lot of changes that happened during COVID, but it was almost too short a period of time. I'll say I was locked in Melbourne, Australia. I do not want it to be longer. I was very, I was a prisoner of Australia for a couple of years, so that's not what I'm advocating for. But what we did see is that there was a rubber band effect for most schools, right? What they did is they went online, they started using blended, now fully online structures, and then they kind of over rotated back to pen and paper. So it's really interesting to now see this AI kind of impact, because it's so consumer driven, right? So many people are bringing it to the schools, regardless if it's a decision by a superintendent or school leader, that maybe we will see some of that connection, that some of that readiness, some of that more openness. And I will say that while schools are slow, it seems like the trajectory in schools is around the same adoption curve as industry. And I think especially individual use seems to be following that path. And then I would even say for policy wide and ethical guidance is even more than industry. So I think there is that chance for us to take a lead with reports like Civic Now, but also the work that we're doing together. So thank you for that perspective. Okay, Ace, to you. You built the
Wow.
thing. So you helped build
I
the thing. So
I
you have many
know. Well, I
opinions.
mean, we all built it together. I think that we one of the points that we raised in the report was that just be generous with us, because this was human beings that were having these discussions with our imperfect perspectives. I think that I've lived in two societies in my life. One is an authoritarian regime and one is a democracy. You can have an authoritarian regime without a sort of foundation of civil discourse or any of that. You can't have a democracy with it. And the whole experiment is based on a system of trust. If you don't trust each other, if you don't trust the institutions, if you don't trust that your vote counts, the whole thing is a house of cards and it falls down apart. And so I think that with this new inflection point of this technology, we need to be very intentional about how, the context that we're teaching it, and not be so entirely focused on the technical aspect of it, coding and those other things, but this broader conversation. And I was just sharing with the Amanda, Mark, and Samvi. I'm on my daughter's superintendent's advisory committee here in Mongallo. Well, I shouldn't throw them under the bus. But I'm here on the superintendent's advisory committee, and we were supposed to have like different conversations that families really cared about. And I put in there like, we should talk. It's an election year. We should talk about democracy and what we do for social cohesion. And I got a response that this isn't an important topic. And so I think that we need to like take this moment, and each of us needs to take our role in being advocates for this conversation. That this is a really important moment, that everything we rely on, our jobs, everything is based incumbent on the fact that we live in a society that trusts each other enough that we're still engaged in this sort of social cohesion democracy. If that falls apart, our lives change fundamentally. And so for me, working in the role that I do, I really believe that the foundation and the strength of our democracy isn't happening with us adults in the room, it's happening with youth in classrooms today. And the decisions we make to what we prioritize and the parts of these conversations that we need to be more explicit about are really going to be determine the outcome of that. So I think it's important for that sort of reason. It needs to fall within a broader culture where this issue this mindset is important.
Absolutely. And let's give everyone, Ace, give him a virtual hug, because I know that was a frustrating moment. So we're all going to give you good vibes right now to Ace. I do think that we see that play out though, Ace. We see this uneven readiness spectrum, right? And I think that a lot of it comes from a lack of time and awareness of the impact, like a lack of time just in general, but lack of awareness of the potential impact. So actually it's a perfect segue to the next question. The next question is like, from us, from Samvi, your perspective, Mark, and from Ace, like what do we need to do to get people to listen? Like what are the things like we need to do to get students to listen, to get teachers, leaders, or even superintendents to listen to this important moment in time? So Samvi, do you ready to respond?
Absolutely. I think right now within this movement overall towards AI literacy and also towards understanding AI more deeply in the context of civics, there's a little bit of a hesitancy for like young people to engage in the conversation because sometimes I think their purview is that others in the movement want to eliminate social media. And I think young people are really hyperfixated on the benefits of social media in their lives right now. I think like there should be a narrative, there can be a little bit of a narrative shift there in terms of emphasizing that this is about making platforms and making technologies better in serving the needs of youth rather than taking that alternate approach of removing the presence of those platforms, because as we've talked about, there are so many benefits that should be realized just in a more responsible manner. I think in line with that, I think we need to be creating, I guess, the conditions for users across the board, not just younger users, but any user to engage constructively and responsibly with AI. And I think that comes down to also breaking down what AI is. I don't think a lot of people understand what AI is and kind of throw it around as a buzzword. I've seen a lot of tweets like that where people will say something and they'll mention AI, and I'm like, I don't know if that's AI, but that's great. And so I think that's another thing that probably needs to happen is I think definitely considered a buzzword. A lot of students themselves don't exactly know what counts as AI and how it works. So I think breaking down and demystifying technology across the board and its relationship to you as a user and also as a person existing in this society is really, really important. And I think that will help create the conditions for users to engage more constructively and responsibly with technology. And I think as younger and younger people join these platforms, I know I like first joined social media in high school. I know like my younger brother is a lot younger than joined like a lot younger than high school. So I know the age keeps lowering. I think education can be a key lever for addressing that because schools are a consistent institution that can reach younger age groups right when they are beginning to engage with these platforms. So looking at AI literacy, information literacy, not just for students, but also for educators, as we've talked about. And I think also this goes beyond just the context of civics education, not limiting AI literacy to the context of civics or social sciences. This affects all subject matters, especially STEM. So investing in civics education, but also general literacy education that is holistic and addresses all of these subject matters is important as well. And then I think in line with that, I do believe that investing in civics education at its core is important. As we talked about earlier, a lot of the reason why engagement online can, especially irresponsible engagement online can be dangerous is because it might be rooted in distrust in institutions at large. And that obviously creates more polarizing conversations that are harmful. So I think showing students and showing young people that democracy works, like that, they're able to experience the idea of community, not just learn about it in the classroom. And this community, both online and offline, I think achieving that trust will be so much more realistic when students understand exactly what their role is as citizens, and how that plays into their engagement on these online platforms that are also just an extension of our democracy in a different way. So I also want to uplift one thing that I think was also mentioned in the report is that it's really important to look at how civics education can keep up with this transition from in-person to digital civic dialogue. And I think that whole idea of keeping up, being sure that we're always one step ahead, or at least transitioning away from a reactionary approach in the long run to one that's more preemptive and can anticipate the impacts of new technological advancements on education will be really helpful too.
Well, that's great, Zombie. So I think that there's a lot to unpick there. I do want to kind of pick up on one thing that I think is really interesting, which is this idea of like how AI fits within the larger ecosystem that's already happened, that goes beyond social media, but goes into the fact that we do have a lot of institutions with a lot of distrust. And then what we've done is we put out this new technology that can actually not be trusted because it's a new technology. You're too young, Sambi, to remember like dial up, or like if you got like if your mom got a phone call, you get kicked off doing your homework. Like, you know, like these new technologies when they first start are by dint of being new, not very good. And so even if they were the most responsibly made tools, the amount of like inconsistency, unreliability, and you know, the fact that they are so nascent would already be something that would make them hard to trust. And so I think that what we have now is that's kind of like that idea, but times like a magnitude, right? Where it's so a part of our lives. It's going to be in Google Maps, it's in Snapchat, there's a fake Kylie Jenner on Meta, you know, like are all these types of things that are happening that we can't dissociate the idea of generative AI literacy from larger civics conversations. And I think this is really the underlying point to the report, but also just to kind of underline for everybody here is that it has to, when you try to talk about generative AI as an island to itself, you miss out on all the things that you can do, like Trojan horsing in just digital literacy, informational literacy, civics education, because it's such an amazing opportunity to show how these things work or don't work and the harm that it could cause or the potential of good. It's actually a pretty easy way to show. So I think that your points are so important for those that are doing the work here on listening to this call, is that how do you connect this so that you're bringing in those viewpoints, but also ensuring that you're not just talking about one thing with one goal, but that you're actually looking at the bigger goal of actually creating a better, you know, hopefully it's a better society moving forward, not a worse one. So Mark, to you again, hard act to follow. Same question.
Same as Sanvi. Next question. No. I think what comes to mind for me is just the idea that AI has the ability to impact our lives beyond just the classroom, that we need to be able to understand it. There was an example, I was at a conference and there was an example of I guess the South Korean president who was just elected was not very popular with his people for whatever reason. They thought he was cold. And so he used a deep fake AI to make these videos of him doing karaoke and all these things to make him more personable and likable. And ultimately it worked. So not only are you dealing with the candidate using AI for himself, he's then publicizing all this information out that is generated by that's not him. So then there's this whole ethical conversation about is that okay? Are you allowed to make a deep fake of yourself for the purpose of selling yourself? Is that not okay? Right? There's a world of possibilities that come out of generative AI becoming part of our lives. And so giving our young people an opportunity to see it in action, to see it impacting their lives, to see it in places outside of it can write an essay for you, right? And being able to show both the positives and the negatives that come with that, I think is a very important part.
Yeah, I mean, how much fun is it? Okay, so okay, you know I'm a nerd, everybody. I just said how much fun is it, like an activity on ethics. But I really believe that there is something like that, Mark. Like, how many fascinating questions can we ask and drive these really unique conversations that have never been had before? We've never been able to have like ourself as an like a fake version of ourselves that can do what we can't. Like, and I think that is something that's really fascinating. And I think that like if you could have those conversations in structured ways, I've seen it happen over and over again. If you give a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old time to have these conversations, or someone like Sanvi, they're gonna dig in because it's like they're rich, interesting, meaningful questions that actually matters to them. And so a lot of times when we have like education, sometimes media literacy is hard or civics education is hard because it doesn't feel connected to ourselves. But like, I want to be an influencer. What if I was a fake? What if I was like kind of me, but an augmented influencer? Like, that's a fascinating question. Like, what are the ethical ways in which that would work? So I think that these are just such really rich ways that we can engage each other in discourse, which is such a key to like a civic education approach in general. So we're gonna go to Ace. We're coming up on time. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have Ace talk, and then I'm gonna go rapid fire to the group on a recommendation, and then we're gonna say goodbye. But Ace, what do you think? What is your
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm much more concerned about the South Korean president example than I am about the Kylie Jenner example. You know, because I mean, like, what do you do of a fake of a fake? Sorry, that's like a political topic of dig at Kylie Jenner, but but yeah, I think that there's to Mark's point in terms of like his elementary age student, like we need to scaffold this. I don't want my daughter to interact with, like, we need to be really mindful of what it is, what this is all will lead to, and think about not just like the cool what are the ripple effects that that will have for our society? Because ultimately, we do not live in our individual rooms. We live in a society, and we have to always be mindful of how we teach young people to be in that society, how we embrace that responsibility within our own society. So that's going to make me like using the word responsibility makes me sound like an old person, but I believe in it, and that's what I think that we need to really take this as a responsibility.
Yeah. You know what? We can be old. You know
Yeah.
what? Fine. Like I think this is a moment where like I think people are looking for that too, though. I don't think this is something in which people aren't looking for guidelines and support. I think more than anything, people are looking for a path forward that's going to lead better to better things. And so let's be old. Let's go into things that we haven't talked about in a while and let's lead into it. So I think that's just really important. Okay, so we're gonna do a final round. So okay, what is your best recommendation right now? You only have less than a minute. What is your best recommendation for ensuring that we are meeting this moment, meaning that we are supporting our kids, our teachers, our leaders, our communities to not be in a position in 15 years where social media has impacted our kids in ways we weren't expecting and maybe were, but didn't do anything. So, Samvi, what do you think is your biggest recommendation?
Ooh, I think my biggest recommendation is similar to like what I said earlier about like shifting away from being in a place where we're reacting to the implications of technologies after understanding the harms to better anticipating them. And I think one way that we can do that is to ensure that while we adopt recommendations like the ones included in this report, that those policy recommendations are complemented by similar like efforts and even a narrative shift within industry, within schools, that there's like almost like a convergence of effort across like different stakeholders to work on this. And I think part of that is also better user consultation in like technological design in industry, and ensuring that we are like, that responsible innovation includes conversations with other stakeholders like ours. Yeah, that's
Amazing. Here. I'm going to like a think tank next week, everybody, and I get to talk to like people that are building these tools. So I'm going to take you with me, Zombie, in my pocket, and we're going to ask questions like that and see what we can do. Next to you, Mark, what's your recommendation?
Get AI in schools in a way that is useful for teachers and useful for students. Find a way to write to your local school district and get them to invest in some AI PD for their staff, because once the teachers are using it, it'll trickle down to the students, even in smaller bites. I would bet dollars to donuts that my daughter's teacher had something about AI in a training, and that's why she was telling her students about it. So get it in the hands of the teachers, and it'll get its way down to the students for sure.
That is our business model, Mark. That is how we do it. That's how we know we impact students because we have had PDs where the responses was, I was so afraid of this. Now I'm excited, but how do I do this with students? Like it's like immediately like they went from just being fearful to like to accepting it and seeing the value and then immediately being like, I'm a teacher because I want to help students. So how do I do that? So I think it absolutely is an unblocker. So that's great. And then Ace, you get the final word.
Yeah, I think Mark outfolded us all for the dollars to donuts thing. And I've met Zombie for the first time last week. I'm shorter than Zombie, so I can fit in your pocket, man. It'll work out. I think the main thing, I'll put the link into the chat for if you have to look at one thing, I would say that's 7 criteria. And so to be intentional, collaborative, communal in this. And that is, I think, the what I would leave with.
It's amazing. So I just want to say thank you so much to our panel. It is such a pleasure to be able to do this work and to advocate for the voices here and to give like I learn every time. And so I just really appreciate everything. I also appreciate Ace. Ace has got one of the best bedside manners for meeting people on Zoom, like really does try to connect and really embodies that work. So I just appreciate Ace and Mark and Zombie and everyone that was part of the Civics Now group. I just want to give you guys a couple of ways you can get involved. We have a prompt library course, but there are two things that we talked about today. One is our AI Literacy Day. So on April 19th, it is a fully free day. We have resources. There'll be live PD to Mark's point. We will have curriculum resources all about what is AI. And so starting to build that foundation of literacy. And so if you want to do that, I've put it into the channel, but please sign up, whether you're a school or a district or a participating partner. We have about 100 participating partners already in school districts from everything from Houston and New York to the whole Vera Cabarrus here in North Carolina, DPI, and out in the Midwest. So we're really excited to have that. And the last thing is we have a summit as well, which is pretty cool, of a day of learning just like this. So I'm sure we'll be highlighting some great pieces here. And I think Sanvi, you might get a little bit of an invite to come speak in that as well. But that's going to be focused on the idea of like, how do we start to do this in a way in which we're building not just capacity, but also starting to think about what the world needs to become. Like, how do we make education better with this new technology? So thank you everybody for joining. I appreciate everyone that's here with us as always. I hope you have a good night, good morning, afternoon, have some lunch, whatever, wherever you are. Thank you everybody for being a part of this. Bye
Thank
everyone.
you, Amanda, and thank you for your community. Bye.